So I'm going to introduce the sewing machine and all the basics that you need to know on the actual sewing machine itself to get you started. So this is something I would suggest for everyone when you start out sewing, is just get those basics and get the threading right to be able to use your machine properly. So I'm going to just run through some of the settings on this brother machine. Every machine is very, very similar though. So if your machine is slightly different, you've still got the same way of threading and the same kind of settings for most machines, whether they're a bit more simple or a bit more advanced. But just to run through, the bit that everyone fears the most is the tension. This is your tension dial on this machine. Now, it's on between 3 and 5, is highlighted, and anything below and above is not highlighted. So therefore, keep your machine tension on about 4 and don't ever change it unless you know why you're changing it, is my little motto really with it. So leave your tension on 4. So if your machine isn't threaded properly, then you'll find it would be something else that's causing that problem rather than you having to change that dial. So just ignore that from now on. Now the other settings on the machine, you've got this has a speed control. You have always got a reverse button, so you have one here, sometimes machines have them over this part. And then you have your stitch settings over here, so it helps you decide whether you want to sew with straight stitch, zigzag, or a number of different ones. So what I'm going to do now is show you how to wind the bobbin and how to make sure that you've got that first little bit right. So I'm going to pop the bobbin here. Then you need to get your chosen thread. I use these moon threads because there's loads of thread on them and they're quite cheap to buy as well, and they last you forever. So I'm going to put that on top of there. Make sure you've got your little holder to keep that in place on the other end. Most machines have got a threading guide on top, so this machine goes under here, over here. Some just go directly straight to this little bit here. So this is the really important bit. This is your little tension little dial here that you need to make sure that your thread goes around there. And when it comes to here, then it means that it's going to be wound on really taut. So I'm going to wrap this about 5 or 6 times around there to grip it into place. So when you push this over to here, it now tells the machine that you're ready to wind the bobbin. So I'm just going to put my foot down. And what you'll find is you can put your foot down flat until it's full and it won't overfill, so it will always stop. So then when you take your bobbin off, you push it back so it's back in sewing mode. You lift it off the top and you cut your thread. Now if you look at this bobbin close up, you'll see it should be nice and taut and really, really neat. So I have got one that I have wound before, and this one, the thread didn't come around this little tension bit here. So therefore, if you can see that, it's really messy and my thumb fingers can really move the thread. So that's a sign that if you haven't got it around this tension bit, then that's how your bobbin will look. So as long as you see that and think alarm bells, then that'll be one less thing for you to worry about when you're sewing. So now I'm going to put the bobbin into the bobbin holder. And we're going to place it as a letter P on this machine. So with a drop-in bobbin, it's always your letter P. Drop that in. So I can leave the thread to one side, pop the cover back on. The next part now, we don't want to have this around here anymore. And again, this is a way that most machines thread. They always go right to left. So we'll have the thread coming over. We come down here, you can see it's all numbered. We come back up. Now if you can't see this little bit up on top here, you just need to get your needle right to the top position and this little bit appears. So keep going right to left, don't cross anything over. Go up, across and down. So what you've made here is a big capital N shape. There's a little bit to tuck under behind the thread, behind the needle, and then we just thread the needle from the front to the back. And the last little thing on here now, we need to hold on to that top thread, not the bobbin one, leave that loose, and we do one whole cycle, which is needle down and needle back up. So using your hand wheel that you always bring towards you, never hand wind it backwards. So wind it towards you and watch it go down, watch it go back up, and when it's done its whole cycle, stop when it's in the top position, and I'm going to pull onto this thread and you'll see that it's looped the bobbin thread underneath. So I'm going to pull that through and I'm going to tuck my thread through the gap in the foot. Now a good way to check that this is done right is to check that there is a bit of thread over the top of the bobbin. When your threads are safely tucked to the back, the bits you should always look for when you're sewing to make sure that everything's going hopefully to plan is you should always have your thread going up over this part, and you should always be able to see a thread going across the bobbin on here. Then you're pretty much good to go. So if your bobbin's wound properly, you're threaded there, you're threaded correctly there, then you are good to go. And any other little bits that can all be solved very, very easily. So when we start to sew on here, you can test by hand winding down, you can sew forward, and you should be able to see that it looks exactly the same on the top and the bottom. But my one last little tip for you when you are sewing, this machine always finishes with the needle in, so you want to obviously take the needle out when you sew. So if you hand wind it up to the top position, so right to the top, this will come out really easily. A mistake that so many people make is they will sew, so I'll show you again, and they'll sew, and then they may only hand wind the needle enough so it clears the fabric, and then panic. It won't come out, it jams, it pulls. There are 4 threads under there, but all you need to do is make sure that every time you finish sewing, hand wind your needle to the top position so it finishes its cycle, and then look how easily that pulls out. So finish with your needle up every single time, and that hopefully will be enough for you to start sewing. Gathering stitch is a really useful stitch to use if you want to gather your fabric in, say if you're making clothing, so you want to gather it in around the bust or the waist, or if you want to gather it in on a product